Fine. Hello, everyone. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you a lot to the organizers. It's been an amazing conference so far. I'm here to be talking about images and what we can do about loading images on the web. I consider we developers, we like to discuss about CSS and JavaScript and what's the latest library and framework, whether we can use React or we can replace it with React in order to save some bytes here and there. And sometimes we forget about images, and I'm going to be talking about why it's important that we keep an eye on images. Images on the web are a huge stake. They represent 2/3 of the bytes that we are sending down the wire whenever we load a page. That's more than anything, more than videos, audio, JavaScript, CSS, all together. And it has an influence on the time it takes our page to load. Something that we should question ourselves whenever we are told to use an image is whether we should or we shouldn't. For me, it would be very easy to just say, don't use an image, and then you have all the problems solved. But of course, that's not the solution. But maybe we can try to adopt some of these design trends that we are seeing nowadays more and more about using minimalist design or flat design. And normally they focus on serving vector images and maybe 1 or 2 big bitmap images. And that's very good for performance because these vector images are normally very small. And also, it's also good for your code repositories. You don't need to be creating several sizes of the images and store them in your repo and maybe also store the PSD file that you use in order to create those files. So it's a good idea to try to embrace that. But of course, that's not always the case, that you can change the design. And in some cases, it might be as easy as just trying to remove a request for an image that is not needed. I'm going to show you a real example of a page I work on. This is Spotify website for, this is a page for a song on Spotify's website. And, well, it's a bit difficult to see, but there's a background image with a picture of Adele there, that it will be visible in a wide screen. But when we serve this to a mobile phone, the user will see something like this. And you can't appreciate anything in the background. So that image that we had there, this screen looks a bit dark, it gets cropped and it doesn't really provide any value. So maybe at this point, we should just remove it. We don't need it there. We can replace it with a gradient or a solid color instead. And someone might think that we can hide it just using a media query and setting the display none. And that will hide it, but the browser will still make the request. So you are fixing it only in one side, which is not showing it. But the browser will see the image tag, and it will send the request, regardless of what you say in your CSS. Another way that we can also make this mistake is by trying to hide a bigger chunk of markup. So here we have a couple of sections. The second one is hidden, but the image within that section will be requested. And there are ways we can prevent this. And one way would be to use some kind of template engine for printing this, rendering this on the DOM. Or if you use some component library, that will usually take care of that. So you don't need to make a huge amount of changes in your design. Sometimes it's a matter of being a bit careful about what your page is really requesting, and we will see more of those examples. Once we know that we want to load a certain image, the next thing we have to do is optimize it. And normally there are trade-offs. Whenever someone tells you this is the best thing, there's always something that they are not telling you, but I can't find any problem with optimizing your images, really. Just do it. There are many tools. Normally I use image optin, but there are some other tools that you can also include in your build pipeline, and they will make the job. The good thing about saving these bytes is that suddenly you have more bandwidth for the rest of the assets that are competing when you are loading the page. So maybe your JavaScript and the CSS will be delivered slightly faster. So you gain in two different ways. And there are tools that will carry out some lossless compression, but there are also these days more tools that are doing lossy compression, and they use a structural similarity to create variants of the same image, and then it will pick one that is close enough to the original one. And you don't need to set, I want this JPEG to be compressed at 80%. It can be dynamically adjusted depending on the image, and you get lots of savings. A third thing that we can do is to use the picture element and source set and sizes attributes. At last, we have a way to implement responsive design, and the thing is that I don't see many sites using it. And to be honest, I don't use it myself. I find a couple of problems with it. And I like to listen to the people that are working on the standards and how they propose this. And then I also like to see how developers are trying to put it in practice. The first thing I personally don't like is that the code can get a bit bloated. There are also this coupling between your markup and these media queries that you might have set on CSS. So you have to be very diligent trying to keep both in sync. It's very easy to make a change in the design in the CSS and forget that you had certain images there that were relying on certain breakpoints. And that's needed by the picture element, or in this case, the image with sizes and source set, because the browser has to have this information in order to know exactly what image it has to request. It's like that. But I would like it to be a bit different. Maybe, given this area, try to find the image that fits that area. But for that, we need the CSS to be in place. The second issue is lazy loading. We still don't have any standard solution for this. We can save so many bytes by just not requesting the images that the user is never going to see. Most of the users go to the page, and they see something and they click around, but they don't scroll to the bottom. However, we are requesting all the images until the bottom. What I've seen working pretty well in practice is to have some content above the fold that uses regular images or a picture element, and then the content that you know is going to be below the fold. In this case, it's rather easy because it's a page that is optimized for mobile. That content below the fold, you apply some lazy loading. And it's savings for everyone. It's savings for the user because they don't need to spend the data on that. And if you're using the CDN, it's also savings for you because you don't have to pay for the CDN for those images that you never serve. Lazy loading is a bit tricky. When done well, it works. When done bad, it can backfire. The basic approach for doing lazy loading is to go through all the images and then check whether they are in the viewport or not. You can also check if they are close enough to the viewport, so you request them because you know that as soon as the user scrolls, they will be in the viewport. And then you have to do this every time you scroll, of course. And then also every time you resize, because resizing can also change the layout, and then new images can appear there. This is really expensive if you just implement it blindly and you listen to all scroll and resize events and check the dimensions of every image. That's going to be invalidating the layout cache for the browser, and the browser has to do extra job every time one of these events is triggered. So if you implement it, try to throttle it. There's a new API. We were talking before about new APIs coming to the browsers. This intersectional server is a really nice one that is already on Chrome and Opera. Instead of listening to the scroll event, you subscribe to events that are triggered by that image. That is not an image anymore. You will be using some div, otherwise it will be making the request. But you listen to that, and then whenever it appears on the screen, you will get an event back. As I said, it's supported on Chrome and Opera, and it's under development on other browsers. And it's very easy to implement a wrapper that uses one or the other. And this is an example. I think it's best if we see it here. So there we get events when that green square is on the screen. But not only on the outer scrollable window, but also in the div that is also scrollable. So it's pretty nice. And it can also be used for rendering virtual lists of lots of elements, not only for lazy loading. Now the interesting thing is, okay, we know we are going to request an image, but what do we show while we are requesting the image? I think that this is really interesting. There are different things that we can do here. The default one is not doing anything at all. We just save the space there. The browser will make a request, and it will come back. The second one is to use a placeholder. This might be useful if you have like a user page and you have a profile image. You can use that, and then if the image for the user is not set, then you can display this one, or you can just show this one until the image is fetched. And normally you would implement this using some SVG. The third one is to just use a color, background color. This is really useful if you are rendering text that has the same color as the background, and you rely on some image to be in the middle. So imagine our background is white and the text is white, but we are going to be putting a background image behind the text. Until we don't have that background, the text won't be shown because it's white as the background of the body. So it's a good idea to use one of the colors that are in the image to serve as a placeholder. And normally there are also tools that you can use, libraries that you can use to give you a palette of different colors that you can use. And the last option, which we will be exploring a bit more, is to use a blurry image. So you use a smaller version of the image and you serve that. And we will see how some sites are using it in practice. I'm going to be talking about the two last ones, because I think those are the most interesting ones and the ones that are trying to improve the user perceived performance of the site. So as examples of solid color, first I'm going to show this one. This is the Chrome browser that whenever it detects that the user is on a slow network, they offer the possibility to hide all images, actually not request those images, use dominant color from the image, and then you have the possibility of tapping in that button to load them. This is really important in countries where the internet connection is super expensive. But they use this also in some other sites that are more normal. This is Arts and Culture, and it's a site that they built for browsing collections of museums. And here you can see, okay, you can barely see it. The color is very pale, but they show some placeholders. The good thing about those placeholders is that they give feedback to the user. So you know that something's going on, that the request already went out and you are waiting for the images to come back. You also get an idea of the size of the image and the color. But you don't need to use one of these weird scenarios. You can just search on Google Images. This video was recorded using a throttle network, and that's why we see lots of these placeholders. But you get the idea. So that's supposed to improve the user perceived performance of the images. Then if we see examples of progressive image loading, it's also called blur up technique. There's one that I think they are doing it a lot. I don't know if they are doing it well or not, but they are doing it, and that's medium. So whenever you go to a medium post and you see an image, they will load it like this. Then they will transition. So first there's no image, then they request a small one that they use to blurry and scale up, and then finally they fade in the big one. And that's a film strip of the process. So this is not straightforward. There are lots of technicalities behind it. They use a div to render the image. If they were to use an image, then the image is already requested. There's nothing to do there. they request the small one, they draw the small one into a canvas, and then they apply a blur effect. You can also achieve the same behavior by using CSS filters, and they have also blur there, and also there's a blur filter on SVG. Not sure why they chose canvas, but it's very creative. Then they request a large image, and then when it's fetched, they render a one and they hide the canvas. And this is the overview of the markup. So if you want to implement something like this, you will need to have several things into account. So there's a div there that is going to keep the aspect ratio of the image. There's the initial small image, there's the canvas, there's the final image, and there's a no script because they care about users that don't have JavaScript enabled. Then the question is it worth it, or how do users see it? And here we have people like it. It looks nice, or it loads very fast. Then you also have people that say it's very distracting, and that it loads extremely slow. And this is very subjective, and it's a problem. I'm not going to say, this is great, guys. False. I can't really say that, because people are going to perceive it in a different way. And this is not surprising. We have had something similar for a long time, which is progressive JPEGs. So there you can see how at 30% of the bytes downloaded, we have already rendered the whole area. Even if it's with a lot of pixels, at least we can draw the whole image. In theory, this is nice. In practice, there's a study that I found, the only study that I've seen that carried out this research, that said that cognitive fluency is inhibited and the brain has to work slightly harder to make sense of what's being displayed. So these progressive images are a bit harder for the user to process. And there's only 7% of the JPEG images used on the web are progressive, only 7%. So that tells us something. Then this technique can also backfire. There it's very small, but it says, if you are viewing this on desktop and the above image looks a bit blurry, please refresh the page. So instead of ending up with the normal image, we are ending up with the blurry one. So something broke in between. And Sarah also reported something similar. So it's very creative, but it can also backfire. So if you implement something like this, just be careful. Medium are not the only ones using this. Facebook are also doing something similar for the mobile client. And they wanted to inline the initial thumbnail, and they wanted to make it super small, so it was part of the payload, the initial payload served by the GraphQL. So whenever you visited the user's profile page, there was a request to the service, and then the response would already contain the image. So you don't need to make another trip to get the full image to render something. And they decided that a good value for the size of the image would be 200 bytes. But there's a problem with JPEG, and it's that only the headers of a JPEG image is already bigger than that. So these are also very creative people, and they decided that, okay, let's try to find the common header for all the images, store that in the mobile client, and then serve only the compressed data. And then we put it together later on. So just so you see how several companies are trying to really make this super performant, especially in countries where they have very slow networks. And this is super creative, and I was wondering, okay, let's give it a try. Let's see how small I can make a JPEG. And I used images that were 42 by 42 pixels, which are the same size that they report. And I make them, I compress them at maximum. And yeah, they were right. They are bigger than 200 bytes. Then I started playing with GIF, PNG, and whatnot. And I thought, yeah, well, let's use WebP. And it turns out that WebP is really nice for encoding small images, and it actually, except for this image on the rightmost, they are way smaller than 200 bytes, and they are roughly 25% of the size of a JPEG. And one might say that the images are not exactly the same, they don't have the same artifacts, but these are images that are going to be used for applying a blur effect on it. And then when you apply that effect, they look mostly the same. So yeah, at some point we might want to be creative, but we also need to be aware of all the new formats and new APIs that appear, because maybe it's a moment to embrace them. And yeah, last but not least, I like SVGs. We've seen how powerful they are. And I was seeing this page, I don't know if you've seen it. It's a review of a PlayStation on Polygon's site. They also did a review for Xbox One. And I really like how they were drawing on SVG. And then I started playing with it, and I said, okay, let's try to reproduce it. And you can use any SVG by applying a certain transition to the stroke dash offset, you will get this drawing effect. But what does this have to do with loading bitmap images? Well, it turns out that we can use something for loading these bitmap images, which is detecting the edges. So instead of trying to vectorize the image, we can try to draw the edge. And there are implementations of this algorithm in JavaScript. And then you can do something like this. So imagine that instead of serving a small version of the image, you serve SVG. These SVGs are 3-4 kilobytes, so they can be inline. And you can be drawing them while you load the big image. I don't know how useful it is, but it's kind of fun seeing something around there. And you can drop any image, and it will just work. And you can define how many lines you want to use, or how big the SVG you want it to be. And the way this is done is, as I explained, you find the edges using a certain algorithm, and then you create lines. These lines, in my case, I chose polylines, but you can also use paths in SVGs. And then once you have the SVG, then you use the same technique to draw it. It's a no-brainer. So should we do this? Just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. It's like these people that say that if it can done using JavaScript, it will be done using JavaScript. And you see terminals, you see almost operating systems implemented in JavaScript. People do it for fun, but I think the web is fun. It's intrinsically fun. It's open. We can all right-click and inspect the element, and that's how I learn web, and that's how everyone can learn about these techniques. And it's open by default. The code doesn't live compiled behind some weird package. So just go out and experiment with this and try these techniques. Why not? I mean, as long as they are easily revertible. So if you use something crazy like, well, not crazy, something like what they are doing at Medium, that's completely right. Eventually, they might move to something else. But as long as it's something that they can decide from one day to the other, why not? Let's try new things. And yeah, that was my talk. Thank you very much.